I got the call on a Tuesday morning, and for a full 30 seconds, I just stood in my kitchen holding my phone, staring at the number on the screen like it was written in a language I didn't speak. $3.2 million. That's what the estate attorney said. My great-aunt Meredith, a woman I'd met maybe 4 times in my entire life, who lived alone in a farmhouse outside of Bozeman, Montana, who collected vintage postcards and kept goats and never once mentioned having any money, had left me everything. Her land, her savings, her investment accounts. All of it. I sat down on the kitchen floor, just slid right down the cabinet and sat there. I had $214 in my checking account. I was a licensed practical nurse working the overnight shift at a long-term care facility in Columbus, Ohio. I drove a 2014 Civic with a crack in the windshield I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I ate a lot of peanut butter. And now some attorney in Montana was telling me I was worth more than $3 million. I didn't tell anyone. Not that day, not that week. I want to explain why. Because I think people hear that and immediately assume the worst. That I was being calculating, or cold, or that I had some scheme already forming. It wasn't like that. It was more like I needed to understand what was real before I let anyone else's reaction make it feel less real. I'd grown up watching my family treat information like currency. Someone finds something out, they use it, they trade it, they hold it over your head. I wasn't ready to hand anyone that kind of power. Not yet. So I went to work. I changed bedpans and administered medications and held the hand of a 91-year-old man named Walter, who called me by his daughter's name every single night, and I never corrected him. I drove home at 6 in the morning with the sun coming up, pink over the highway, and I thought about Meredith, who I barely knew, deciding I was worth everything she had. The only person I told was my coworker, Theo. Theo wasn't even supposed to be someone I was close to. We'd worked the same overnight rotation for about a year and a half, and at first we were just 2 people who shared a break room and occasionally complained about the same things. But somewhere around month 4, his car died in the parking lot at 3 a.m., and I drove him home, and we ended up sitting in his driveway talking until almost 6, and after that we were just friends, real ones, the kind that don't require explanation. Theo was 33, working nights to put himself through a physician assistant program during the day. He was exhausted all the time in a specific way that people are when they're building something. He heated up the same meal-prepped containers of rice and chicken every single night, and he'd started tutoring high school kids on weekends for extra money because his financial aid had gotten cut. He didn't complain about any of it, he just did it. I told him on a Thursday night in the break room over bad vending machine coffee. I just said it plainly, my great-aunt died and left me $3 million and I don't know what to do. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, are you okay?" Not, "Are you serious?" Not, "Oh my God." Not, "What are you gonna do with it?" Just, "Are you okay?" That was Theo. I said I didn't know. He said that made sense. We sat there for a while. He asked me how I felt about my great-aunt, if I was grieving, and I told him the truth, which was that I felt guilty for not grieving more. He said that was also okay, and then we went back to work. That was it. That was the whole conversation. And I knew, sitting there at 3 in the morning under fluorescent lights, that I told exactly the right person. Now I need to tell you about my family, and I want to be fair about this because I've spent a long time trying to be fair. My mother is a woman who loves hard and controls hard, and sometimes those 2 things are indistinguishable from each other in our house. She has opinions about everything. My career, my apartment, my weight, my hair, the way I load a dishwasher. When I became an LPN instead of an RN, she told her friends I worked in healthcare and left it at that. When I didn't marry the guy she liked when I was 26, she brought him up for the next 3 years in a way that was somehow both subtle and relentless. My older brother Wesley is my mother's favorite and has always known it and has always used it. When we were kids, he'd go to her with things I'd told him in confidence, and she'd confront me with them later, and when I'd look at Wesley, he'd just shrug. That shrug. I've thought about that shrug so many times as an adult, what it meant. What kind of person shrugs when their sibling looks at them like that? Wesley married a woman named Dana 4 years ago, and she was exactly like him. Charming in a way that required an audience, and sharp in a way she only let you see when she was certain she had the upper hand. She worked in real estate, drove a BMW, and talked about property values at Thanksgiving. She and my mother got along immediately and completely, which told me everything I needed to know. Then there was my grandmother, Nana May. She was 81 and sharp as a tack, and she would have hated being described that way. She loved game shows and Earl Grey tea, and she was the one who taught me to drive. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she already knew the ending to whatever story you were telling. She was the first person in my family I wanted to tell about Meredith's money, but I didn't because Nana May couldn't keep a secret to save her life. She meant well. She just couldn't. My sister-in-law Dana was the one who started the group text. This was about 3 weeks after I got the call from the attorney. I was in the middle of navigating probate, opening a new bank account, quietly meeting with a financial advisor my attorney recommended. I had said nothing. And then Dana sent a message to the family thread, the one with my mother and Wesley and my aunt and 2 cousins, saying that they were thinking about buying a vacation property and were there any family members who might want to go in on it together as an investment. The number she floated was $60,000 as a starting contribution. I stared at that number for a while. I hadn't told anyone about the inheritance. But Dana knew things. She always knew things. She worked real estate, she knew estate attorneys, she knew how to look up probate records if she wanted to. I had no proof. But I noticed the timing. I didn't respond to the text. My mother called me that evening. She said she thought the vacation property was a great idea, that it was building something for the family, that it was smart to invest in real assets. She mentioned that Wesley and Dana had done their research. She said it would be nice if we all came together, and that I'd always been a little bit on the outside of the family, and maybe this was a chance to change that. I held the phone away from my ear for a second and just breathed. "Mom," I said, "I'm saving for my future. I can't do $60,000. She said she understood. The way she said it made clear she did not understand. We hung up. Then came the guilt texts, not from her but from Wesley. Long ones, which was unlike him, which meant Dana had written them. About family legacy. About how I never participated. About how they weren't asking me to give money, they were offering me an opportunity. About how they'd always supported me. That last one actually made me laugh out loud, alone in my apartment, at 11 at night. I didn't respond to any of it. But here's the thing about being part of a family that uses information like currency. I knew that if I just stayed quiet, they'd escalate. They always escalated. So I decided to find out what I was actually dealing with. I needed to know if it was just Dana's opportunism or something worse. I needed to know who in my family would actually show up for me, just me, with nothing in it for them. I called my mother on a Sunday afternoon. I kept my voice level. I said I had something hard to tell her. I said I'd been having some health issues. Nothing catastrophic, but the doctors wanted to run more tests, and I'd had to take some unpaid time off work, and I was really struggling financially. I said I didn't want to be dramatic, but I was scared. I asked if she could help me with my rent. Just 1 month, $850, while I figured things out. She said, and I remember this clearly, "Honey, you know we're stretched thin right now with the property thing. You should have been saving better. You're a grown woman. You know I love you, but this isn't something I can take on right now." I said I understood. I got off the phone. I sat very still for a while. Then I called Wesley. I told him the same thing. He listened and then said he'd have to talk to Dana, and I said okay, and he never called back. I texted him 2 days later, and he left it on read. I texted my cousin Brianna, who I'd always thought of as the decent one. She sent back a sad face emoji and a message that said she'd pray for me and that God had a plan. She did not offer money. She did not offer to come over. She did not follow up. And then I called my coworker Theo. Because I felt I needed to tell someone and I wanted to see what would happen. I told him the same story I told everyone else. Health scare, no pay, behind on rent. And Theo was quiet for a second, and then he said, "How much do you need?" I said $850. He said, "I get paid Friday, let me Venmo you Saturday morning." Just like that. He did not have $850 to spare. I knew his finances. I knew what he made. I knew about the PA program and the tutoring and the meal prep containers. He was offering me money that would genuinely hurt him to give. I told him not to. I told him I was okay, it was a misunderstanding, I was figuring it out. He said okay, but that the offer stood. I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for a long time after I hung up. Here's what I understood in that parking lot. I had $3 million in an account I hadn't fully processed yet, and the only person who tried to give me money was the one who had the least of it. I thought about my mother telling me I should have saved better. I thought about Wesley's unread text. I thought about the group thread and the vacation property and the $60,000 and whether Dana had looked up the probate records or whether it was just coincidence. I sat with all of it. Then I drove to Theo's apartment complex. He lived on the third floor of a building off Morse Road, and I knocked on his door at like 8:30 at night and he answered in sweatpants holding a textbook and looking baffled. I told him I needed to tell him something. He let me in. I sat on his couch and I told him everything. The inheritance, the full amount, the attorney, all of it. I told him about the test I'd run on my family. I told him about every phone call. He sat across from me in his desk chair and he didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, "I'm really sorry about your family. Not about the money, not you're rich, not oh my God." The first thing he said was that he was sorry about my family. I said I was too. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" And that question, "What do you want to do?" was the most important thing anyone asked me through this entire thing. Not what should you do, not what are you going to do, what do you want? I told him I had some ideas. The first thing I did was call the estate attorney and make sure everything was properly transferred and documented. I'd been delaying this. I don't entirely know why, maybe because it made it more real, but I did it. I opened a proper investment account with a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor who had been recommended by someone with no financial stake in my decisions. I put the bulk of it into a diversified portfolio. I kept a reasonable amount liquid. Then I did something I hadn't told anyone I was going to do. I found out, through some quiet research, that Wesley and Dana had a private mortgage on a vacation rental property they'd bought the previous year. Not the new one, an older one. And that they had a substantial second loan on it that they were servicing. It wasn't underwater yet, but it was close. They were, not to put too fine a point on it, overextended. I had a conversation with a financial broker. I asked some questions about how debt purchasing worked. I made some moves. I won't go into every detail because honestly, the process was dry and took several weeks and involved a lot of paperwork. But the short version is, I became the holder of a portion of that debt. I want to be honest here and say I went back and forth about this. There's a version of me that just moves away, buys a house somewhere nice, lets them drift into whatever they built for themselves. I could have done that. I almost did. But I kept thinking about my mother saying, "You know I love you." In the same breath she said, "This isn't something I can take on." I kept thinking about Wesley and the unread text. I kept thinking about the shrug. I decided they needed to understand what I understood in that parking lot. I invited my mother and Wesley and Dana to dinner. Just us, not Nana May, not my aunt, not the cousins. I picked a restaurant that was nice but not showy. I wore a regular dress. I let them order. My mother spent the first part of dinner telling me about the vacation property and how it was really coming together and how they were working on permits. Dana ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without looking at the prices. Wesley kept checking his phone. When the food came, I set my phone on the table face up. I had a document open. I said, "I want to talk to you about something." They looked at me. My mother had that expression she got when she thought I was about to be difficult. A kind of preemptive bracing. I said, "I want to be honest with you because I think honesty is important in families and I think we've had a lot of dishonesty in ours for a long time." I kept my voice completely even. A few months ago, I received an inheritance from Aunt Meredith. $3.2 million. Dana put down her fork. Wesley looked up from his phone. My mother said, "What?" I said, "I didn't tell you for a while because I wanted to understand the situation first. And part of that was reaching out to each of you when I thought I was in trouble, to see how you'd respond." The silence at the table was remarkable. I said, Mom, I called you and asked for help with my rent. $850. You told me to have saved better. She opened her mouth. I said, I'm not angry, Mom. I just want you to understand what that was like. I am telling you because I think you deserve to know. Then I looked at Wesley. I said, You never called back. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Dana was very still in the way she got still when she was calculating. I told them about Theo. I didn't use his full name, but I described him. Overnight nurse, putting himself through school, genuinely stretched thin. And I told them that when I called him with the same story I'd called them with, he offered me money he didn't have without hesitation. My mother started crying. She said she didn't know. She said if she'd known I really needed help, she would have done anything. I let her talk for a moment. Then I said, Mom, you didn't know because I didn't tell you about the inheritance. What you knew was that I was your daughter and I was scared. And that was enough information. She stopped talking. I told them I wasn't there to punish them. I told them I wasn't going to cut them off or make them beg or act like a person in a movie who keeps a family waiting. I said I hoped we could actually know each other better, that this had shown me something about what our relationships looked like without money in the picture, and I wanted to use that information to be honest with each other going forward. Dana said something about the investment property, something smooth and pivoting, some question about whether I was interested in being part of the family business after all. I watched her work. It was almost impressive. I said, I'm not investing in the property, Dana. She smiled like that was fine. It was not fine. Then I told them I would be selling my share of Wesley and Dana's existing loan to a third-party servicer at the end of the month if they weren't current on their payments. I said I wasn't threatening them. This was just a financial reality that they should be aware of. I said I hoped they had everything in order. I said I was rooting for them. Wesley's face went through several things. I picked up the check, all of it, old habit. Then I said goodbye and I walked out. I drove straight to Theo's. He was studying. He let me in. I sat on his couch and I told him everything and he listened with the textbook still in his lap, and when I was done he said, How do you feel? I said I didn't know yet. A little sad, a little lighter. He nodded like that made sense. The weeks after that were strange in the way that big things always leave strangeness in their wake. My mother called and we had a long, hard conversation, the first real one we'd ever had, where I said things I've been holding for years and she said things I hadn't known she was holding. I don't know if it fixed anything. I think it started something. I'm holding that with open hands for now. Wesley texted me, a real text, not a Dana text. He said he was sorry about not calling back. Just that. No excuse, no explanation. Just I'm sorry. It was 3 words, and it meant more to me than the long ones had. I bought a house, nothing dramatic, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood I'd always liked, with a porch and a yard with room for a garden. I hired a financial advisor and a CPA, and I set up a trust and I went back to work. Because I actually like my job, which I hadn't let myself say out loud before. I like the patience. I like the quiet of overnight shifts. I like the way you can hold something still in the dark. I set up an education fund for Theo, not as a gift. He would have refused a gift. I set it up as a no-interest loan with a repayment structure that made it essentially meaningless as a financial obligation, and I made him read every word of the paperwork before he agreed. He sat there for 45 minutes reading it at my kitchen table, and then he looked up and said, This is basically just you giving me money. I said, Yeah, but now it's a loan and you can keep your pride about it. He laughed. It was the best sound I'd heard in months. He finished his PA program this past spring. He passed his boards on the first try. He texted me at 6 in the morning when he got the results, the same time we used to drive home from overnight shifts watching the sunrise, and I cried a little in a way I hadn't cried in a while, the kind of crying that comes from something full rather than something empty. There are things I still think about, whether I was spare, whether the dinner was the right call, or whether I was performing something instead of living it, whether I could have handled my mother differently years before it came to this. These are not questions with clean answers, and I've stopped looking for them. What I know is this: I have a porch now, and in the mornings after a night shift, I sit on it with coffee and watch the light change, and it is mine, and it is quiet. Nana May came to visit last month and sat in the other porch chair and said absolutely nothing for 20 minutes, which from her was the highest form of approval. She held her tea in both hands and looked at the yard and finally said, "You got a good one." I told her I knew. She's right, I did. I still think about that parking lot sometimes, sitting in my car in the dark, $3 million in an account I hadn't fully accepted yet, and the only person who tried to give me anything was someone who could barely afford his own groceries. There's something I've come to understand about how life actually works. Not in a mystical way, but in a plainly observable, undeniable way. What you put into the world tends to come back to you. Not always from the same direction, not always in the form you gave it, but it comes back. Theo had spent years being the kind of person who shows up, studying through exhaustion, meal prepping on Sundays, tutoring kids on weekends, still finding energy to ask someone, "Are you okay?" in a hospital break room at 3 a.m. That wasn't just personality, that was character built deliberately, over time, through choices nobody was watching him make. And when it mattered, that character was exactly what it had been all along. My family was also exactly what they had always been. I think that's the part I had to sit with the longest. I wanted there to be a version of events where my mother's response was a fluke, where Wesley just happened to have his phone down that week. But the truth is, I had 30 years of data. The patterns were clear. I just hadn't wanted to read them. What I found out, the hard way, the only way it really lands, is that knowing who people are requires seeing them when there's nothing in it for them. That's not cynicism, that's clarity. And clarity, when you finally get it, is one of the most valuable things you can possess. It doesn't feel good at first. It feels like loss. But it is actually the opposite of loss. It is the beginning of building something real. I have thought a lot about what made Theo different from everyone else in my life during that period. Part of it was just who he is. But part of it was something he had built. This quiet, unshakable sense of what was right, and the discipline to act on it even when it was inconvenient, even when it cost him something. He didn't calculate the offer. He didn't weigh it against his own needs. He just responded from whatever he was made of inside, and what he was made of was solid. That kind of integrity doesn't happen by accident. It's a choice made over and over in small moments until it becomes the only way you know how to be. I think about that when I sit on my porch now, about the choices that compound, the ones you make when you're tired, when nobody's watching, when it would be easier to let it go. Those are the ones that determine who you actually are when it counts. The dinner with my mother and my brother was hard in ways I didn't fully anticipate. I had prepared for defensiveness and I got it, but I also got something I wasn't ready for. A glimpse of people who had never been asked to examine themselves and were encountering that examination in real time. It didn't transform them overnight. I don't think these things ever do, but something moved. I could feel it. And I decided that was enough to work with. I don't carry this story of my family as a wound anymore. I carry it as information. It showed me exactly what I needed to build, the kind of life and the kind of relationships that are honest about what they are. The kind of person I want to be when someone I love is sitting in a parking lot at night, not knowing what's real yet. I want to be the one who asks, "What do you need?"